Our gospel reading comes to us this day from Luke's gospel, chapter 24, verses 1 through 12. And about the only thing that can measure up to the beautiful singing that was just what we just experienced is the story itself of Jesus' resurrection. This is Luke's version. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you, while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. For those of you who might not remember, I occasionally will share stories about my family, interactions with my family, or growing up the son of a minister, a PK, preacher's kid. So I have a story to share about my most recent visit with my mom. I went to go see her on Good Friday. Zane and I surprised her and headed down and visited with her for the afternoon. The topic of conversation I'm learning as I get older each year is fairly predictable when I visit with my mom. One of the things that we talk about, of course, is what are you going to preach on Sunday? Mom is known in Lee and Moore counties for her preaching and teaching. She's well regarded for her teaching. She's a retired commissioned lay pastor, and so when she asks me, what are you going to preach on? She's interested to know what I'm going to preach on, but she's also interested to let me know what I should preach. And so her suggestion for this Sunday, I told her the text that we would be reading for today. And so her suggestion for today was, why don't you start out the sermon by asking folks this question? And she's convinced that no one will get this right. So I'm going to test that theory out. The question is, who was the first preacher? Who was the first preacher? You can say it out loud if you want. Who was the first preacher? Who? John. We hear a John. Who else do we hear? Peter, maybe? No. It was the women. Mary was the first preacher. All Christian preaching flows from Mary's proclamation that he is risen. He's not here. John's gospel has Mary saying that to the disciples when she reports back to them. He is risen. In Luke's version, we just simply have the account of what the women share with the disciples, the 11 and the other followers of Jesus when they go back. And wouldn't you know it, women being the first preachers, what do the men do? How do they react? In Luke's gospel, they think it's an idle tale. Sort of that eye roll, oh boy, the women going off again like they do. There, dear. I'm sure Jesus is actually there. In the Greek, idle tale, they literally thought that the root word for idle, I-D-L-E, in the Greek, suggests that the women were actually crazy. It was nonsense. It was a crazy tale. Indeed, it certainly seems like a ridiculous story. Even today, if we hear it for the first time, let's just imagine that we're hearing this tale for the first time, living in the culture that we live in today. Why, we might think that this is some episode out of The Walking Dead, to hear about how Jesus comes back to life, a sort of reanimation of a dead body. But no, that's not what's going on here. Jesus speaks to his own death by crucifixion at the hands of sinners, and he speaks of rising again, having new life, resurrection. This is not a reanimated body. This is not a resuscitated body after several days of death. They somehow hit him real hard in the heart and he starts beating again. No. This is a resurrected Jesus, a new Jesus, as it were, a bodily resurrection. Well, we all know the what of the story. Christians know the story. I would even venture to say that even out there in a post-Christian culture, which is what we have in America today, even folks who did not grow up going to church most likely may know the what of the story, that Jesus was risen out of the tomb. There are enough mini-series about this and movies about this on the History Channel and other channels. So I think we know, perhaps all know the story. Of course we do, particularly those of us gathered in the room today. But why is this story important? If we know the what of the story, then so what? What does it mean for us? What does the resurrection of Jesus Christ mean for us? Well, quite simply, it's because of eternal life. That's really what we as Christians go towards. The reason Jesus was resurrected, so that the world, we may have life and life eternal. John's Gospel 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. Yes, that is the why to the story, but that's not all of the answer. And this is where it's very important for us to think about the why. Yes, this is about eternal life. But the resurrection of Jesus is also about our life today. How will we leave this room this morning when we go out into the world and go out into our work weeks, go out into our common life? How will we live a resurrected life each day of our lives? And that I will submit to you, as important as eternal life is, living a resurrected life today, if not equally important, might even be more important. How shall we live our lives today is the abiding question that we must grapple with every day. Not just today, not just on Sunday mornings, certainly not just on Easter morning, but every morning and every moment of our days. How shall I live out a life of hope and a life of promise? A life that gives life and blesses life upon others. You see, that's what Jesus did for us when he died and was raised again. He claimed a victory for us, not only for eternal life, but also for an abundant life today, a life full of grace, abundance of grace, an abundance of mercy and of love, and of knowing that no matter what happens in our lives, no matter how difficult our lives become or how difficult our lives are, we have hope. Hope that can sustain us each and every day. That does not, to me, seem like an idle tale. Yes, the women were written off. They were regarded as nonsensical, crazy even. But in seeing the risen Jesus, and in Luke's version, seeing the empty tomb and having the men say to them, the angels who were there say, "He is not here, he is, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he is risen." They were living into hope. The hope that life and love, grace and mercy are what shall abide in this world today. So of all the things that we see in the world today, oppression in the world, hatred in the world, death and killing in the world today, they do not have the last word. That's why this story is important. Death, oppression, all of those things, they do not have the last word. Love, hope, grace, mercy, faith, those are the last words. And that, my friends, is not idle.